so that video actually has volume to it. So I'm going to need you to start that video over. And you all need to watch this video, okay? There we go, that's it.
Every road in this here land. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the deserts bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. I travel, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere. I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, Paloma, Vegas, Baltimore, Salvador, Arizona, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla, I've been everywhere.
All right, very good. I had to have you listen to it because it's part of my setup for today. And so you had to know what I'm talking about. I was making that video a couple weeks ago, and of course that was Johnny Cash singing. He's known as the Man in Black, right? So I had Johnny Cash on my mind, and my son William comes out of the bedroom, and he's got on black shorts, and he's got on black shirt, and I say, "Hey, buddy, Man in Black." And he looks at me kind of funny, and I was like, I thought this was a teaching moment. So I said, "Hey, do you know who the Man in Black is?" And he says, "Yeah, Will Smith." And it took me a second before I caught on. I was like, is that a racist comment? What is he saying right there? But then I realized, no, he's talking about the movie Men in Black, Will Smith. And I was like, oh, wait, okay, that's a good answer. But no, not the one I'm talking about. The Man in Black is Johnny Cash, but we're getting there. We're teaching him, trying to teach you a few ththings. But I want you to think about for just a second what you read when you saw that going on. This idea that wherever you've been, wherever you go, wherever you are, you can trust that God has been there. Here's why I think that is a powerful statement. This is the reason. Because we all know there is something important, there is something valuable to talking to people who have been through what we are going through or what we are getting ready to go through. There's something important about that. That's why we do things like college orientation, right? It's where all the incoming freshmen get to come in. They meet with the upperclassmen. The upperclassmen tell them where the good spots are to go hiking or where to get a good late night snack or where you can find a copy of that professor's test who hasn't changed it like in 10 years, right? These are the sort of things that go on during college orientation. We see it in other areas of our lives. Another area would be when you go through something difficult or you have somebody who goes through something difficult. Something that they will often say is, well, you know what? You just don't understand unless you've what? Unless you've been there. You just don't understand unless you have been through it. There is truth in that statement. And what I hope we can do, over the next few weeks as I take us through some stories that are in the scriptures is realize that there are times where we are tempted to say, man, it has never been this bad. Man, you know what? I'm the only one going through this. Or man, there's just no help for this. And I want us to see people have been through difficult things before. People have been through just about everything. And guess what? God has been right there with them. God has been there. There is someone who understands. There is someone who can provide help. In fact, throughout these stories of Scripture, we have people going through all of this craziness. Over centuries of craziness are represented for us here in this Scripture. And there's something that God says to them over and over and over again. And I want you to see this. I want you to see what it is. It's not been there. It's the next thing. Go on to the slide notes. When you see this next phrase, this Scripture is something that is repeated in various ways all throughout the text. The text is this: I will never leave you nor forsake you. We see this over and over and over again. So no matter how crazy it got in their lives, no matter how crazy it got in their culture, God was right there with them. So what are we going to talk about today? What is the thing that we're going to be dealing with today? Well, here it's kind of summarized for you in this statement. It's a statement I hear a lot. It's not one I agree with. However, I'm very, very tempted to agree with it. It kind of goes like this. The statement is, man, this world is the worst it's ever been. This world is getting worse and worse. And then they'll look at me and they'll say, I'm afraid for your children. I'm like, what? And they say, I'm afraid for your children because they're growing up in a culture that's worse and worse and worse, and who knows what they're going to have to deal with. And when I hear that, I'm tempted to say, kids, let's get in the car. We're going to Colorado. Right? And I'm just like, let's get out of here because nothing bad ever happens in Colorado. At least for some reason, I have this nostalgic view of Colorado. But we know it does. We know it does, right? I'm tempted to believe it because, let's be honest, there is a lot to make us pessimistic about the culture that we exist in. Think about terrorism. Every week there seems to be a new attack. Violence and promiscuity seem to not just be in front of us, but promoted before us all the time. Or how about this? It seems like people are more influenced by athletes and celebrities than they are like teachers and books and preachers and things that are true. And evidence of this is that we're emboldening the celebrities. Just last month, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson announced that he's thinking about a 2020 bid for the President of the United States. Does that scare anybody else in this room? Does that not? And here's the thing. I love The Rock, okay? We watched some of his movies. He's got some funny stuff out there. I enjoy him. And I normally don't like to make political statements from the stage here. But I'm pretty sure, it's a pretty safe bet, The Rock in 2020 is not the best direction for America. But what's funny is, he was probably just promoting a movie. He probably just wanted to get some headlines, to get his next movie out there. But here's the thing, they ran a bunch of polls after he made this announcement, and it turns out there was tons of people who would have voted for him. In fact, many of the polls found he would have beat Donald Trump. Is that not scary? So yes, there's lots in our culture to make us think that maybe it is the worst it's ever been, but I want to remind us of a few things, okay? Just a couple of generations ago, from 1914 to 1945, over 100 million people died in the world wars. And that was with a 20-year break in fighting. A few generations before that, slavery was a major source of currency in global economies. It wasn't just an underground black market, it was a major source of currency. Now, I don't want to undermine what we're seeing today, because what we're seeing today is absolutely terrible, and we need a way forward. But you can go on, culture after culture, civilization after civilization before us, and see how those things went absolutely crazy. And the good news is this. The good news is this. Because of that, God has seen it all. God has been there, and God provides for us a way forward. The way forward that I want us to look at today is from a letter that we have in the Scriptures. It's the letter to the Ephesians. It's written by Paul. He, of course, many of you know Paul. He was the great missionary. He wrote letters to lots of different places. And he has this letter to the Ephesians that he wrote. And what he does is he wants to help them deal with their culture. Ephesians, or Ephesus, Ephesus was this city that was like a religious Mecca. And it wasn't just one religion. It was basically a religious buffet. You could go to Ephesus, and you could see a temple to just about every god anywhere. On every corner there were these different temples, and the temples back then were crazy. I mean, you take Catholic Mass and you mix it with things that are only legal in Las Vegas, and you put it together, and that's what the temple life was like to these pagan gods. And so if you wanted any indication of what that culture was like, that was temple, okay? If that's any indication, you can only imagine what the rest of their culture was like. So Paul is writing to these people, and he wants to help them exist in this culture. And this is a really important message for us to hear, because I think I saw a lot of nodding heads. We could probably agree that we too live in a culture that seems to have gone crazy, and we need some wisdom. So look at what Paul does. I want to give you a little summary of the entire letter. The letter is very short. Sit down this week, 2 10-minute sessions, and you'll have the whole thing beat, okay? It's very, very short, but there's a lot in there. But there's 2 major sections. Chapters 1 through 3 talk about God's story, what God has been doing. And then chapters 4 through 6 are our story. Now, when Paul talks about God's story, he lays forth some really big ideas. He lays forth what we would call theological ideas. And I say that word theological, and there's some of you who your eyes kind of gloss over. You don't want to get into all that. But however, it's really important stuff. But then toward the end of the book, he gets super practical. He starts telling you, okay, because of these big ideas, big theological ideas, you know what? Husbands, be good to your wives. Children, honor your parents. Be good to the people whom you depend upon. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to start with some really big ideas, but then it's going to get really good. It's going to get really practical. It's going to be something that you can really get your hands around. So let me just make this statement. When Paul starts out this letter, for the first 3 chapters, what he wants the people to know is this next thing that's on the screen. This next thing that I want you to see. The next thing is God has been and still is up to something. God has been and still is up to something. Now that is a huge deal that Paul starts there. When he's wanting to help these people exist in their culture, he starts with that idea. And here's why he starts with that idea. When you look at human civilizations of our past, culture after culture after culture, the main reason those cultures went crazy was because their core convictions about God allowed bad behavior, okay? their core convictions about God allowed bad behavior. Ancient civilizations were incredibly violent. They were incredibly violent because they believed in gods that were incredibly violent. People believed in slavery and thought that was okay because they believed that God made certain people to be servants and certain people to rule. That was just what they believed. In our culture today, I think when it comes to God, most people believe that God is either not very real or just not very influential. So life just kind of becomes about trying to survive, trying to be happy. Those convictions are incredibly important. And Paul knows that those convictions are very important. So he starts there and says, you have to have an understanding about the world, the story of the world. And what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of summary of what Paul does in those first 3 chapters, because it's very important for us to understand what the Christian view of the world is. We believe that the story of the world, the main story of the world, is contained within the Scriptures. And the way that these scriptures start out is a book called Genesis, right? The word Genesis just means beginning. It's not very creative, but it's very descriptive. It just means beginning. And at the beginning of beginning, the first few chapters are all about this one word. And I want you to see this one word. It's all about the word divisions, okay? It's all about the word divisions. If you look at the next slide, division between God and people, division between families, division between races and ethnic groups. It starts off, first few chapters of Genesis, and God is divided from humans. And then the next thing that happens is a brother kills a brother, and we see families destroyed. And then the next thing that happens is races of people start to speak different language, and they're all separated from one another. And it's at the conclusion of this that God says, they need me. And so what he does is he chooses someone. He chooses a group of people. And for centuries, he pours into them, teaching them about himself. And they often forget, and he has to remind, and he has to forgive. But it's just this cycle for centuries and centuries. And then God does something incredibly unique. He says, I'm going to be among them. And he sends his son through that people. And you know what we did with his son? We killed him. Because cultures have gone so crazy for so long, when they saw ultimate goodness, they could not even recognize it. But here is what makes Christianity, Christianity. On the third day, Jesus rose again. There is no Christianity without the resurrection. We could spend a whole Sunday talking about, as crazy as it seems like the resurrection really did happen. Because within just a few centuries, Christianity spread throughout the entire world. Not a single shot was fired. There was no army. There were no swords. There was no cavalry. They were armed with 2 things. They were armed with 2 things. There were witnesses who saw this risen Jesus. But you know what? That would have been easy to discredit, right? Because if your friends know you, then they might trust you when you say, guess what? This guy who was dead is not risen again. But when you go into another city and the people don't even know you and you say that, you seem a little odd, right? It would make people say, okay, buddy, and just kind of let you walk along. They were armed with the second thing. And the second thing was a brand new culture. A brand new way of doing things. I want you to look at this verse, this first verse that I want us to look at from the book of Ephesians, as Paul is going through, and he is talking about this culture, and he is talking about this story of God. He writes this, that Jesus, his purpose was to create in himself one new humanity. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity. Important words right there. That word one. He said in other ways, in just a little bit earlier in this book of Ephesians, he said that God wanted to bring unity between heaven and earth. He wanted to bring things together. Just before he wrote this verse, he said he wants to break down the dividing wall of hostility, which was a wall of hostility between different ethnic peoples. In another book, or another letter that he wrote to Galatia, he said, in Jesus, there's now no more Jew and no more Greek, no more slave, no more free. This idea of there being this oneness was really important to Paul. And then this idea of a new humanity. This idea that these people will operate in a different way than cultures always have. They will have a different set of standards. And when we start talking about those standards, it gets really practical. I want to pause because I had to lay forth a bunch of theological things. I had to lay forth a bunch of big ideas, and I know that it's hard for us to kind of wrap our minds around that this early in the morning. Because what I'm talking about is your convictions. I'm talking about what you believe about the story of the world and how that needs to impact your life. And there's some of you who are sitting here saying, man, I just need to figure out what I'm having for lunch, right? I don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about my convictions. And it's not just today, but I don't know if any day throughout our weeks we actually spend some time talking or thinking about our convictions. Why do you get up in the morning? What do you think is the big story of the world? Because I know we can get so busy just trying to get to work, just trying to make enough money to survive, just trying to figure out what are we going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and how am I going to get some sleep, that we don't step back and say, what are my convictions? And it's important. The reason that Paul wrote about this story of the world that we need to talk about, the reason that's important for existing in our culture is because this next thing that I want you to see. I want you to see this next thing. If you do not have convictions, you will drift with the crazy culture. If you do not have convictions, you will drift with whatever the culture is. That's why our convictions are so important. And we need to get into this, and we need to talk about that. Now, there might be some of you who are saying, okay, I don't know if I'm totally on board with that idea of the story of the world, but let's talk about those convictions that we want to live by. Let's talk about that new culture. You know, what is the old culture? What is the old culture? Because maybe I like crazy, right? Maybe I like some of the old things. Well, here's the thing. That's what Paul did later on in his letter. I want to show you something that's a big image. We subscribe to this thing called the Bible Project here at the church, and they have these posters that help people understand the different books of the Bible. And what you're going to see in just a second is a big image of Ephesians. Are we working up there? Mark, have we fallen asleep? There we are. There we are. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't even put anybody to sleep. But here's the image of Ephesians. This is the drawing that they have, and it's really complex, and you have to really get into it to see the whole thing. But what I want to do is I've made another image that zooms in where Paul starts talking about the old and the new. In chapter 4, he begins to really contrast the old ways and the new culture that Jesus came to create in himself. And I want you to look at this. The idea is take off the old, put on the new. That's what it says at the top. And then it contrasts. Old ways are lies. The new ways are truth. The old way is anger. The new way is peace. The old way is theft. The new way is generosity. It contrasts gossip versus encouragement. Revenge versus forgiveness. Promiscuity versus self-control. Drunkenness versus God's Spirit. Even if you're not so sure that you want to get on board with the whole story, maybe you don't know about the entire story, maybe that's not natural to you, I think you can look at this list and say, I think that the new ways are better than the old. I think you're going to ask yourself, who do you want in your life? Who are the people that you want in your life? And here's the temptation. Here's the pushback. Here's the temptation. Whether we'll admit it or not, sometimes we're like, I don't know, John. Some of those old ways are kind of fun. Some of those old ways are kind of tempting. I mean, gossip, right? I don't mean to do it, but sometimes it's kind of fun. But here's the thing. It's not when the rumor's about you, right? It's not when the rumor is about you. Or how about down through there, down toward the bottom, promiscuity? I mean, we all in church, we know. No. However, so many of us live like, oh, it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. But here's the deal. It's not fun when it's your husband being promiscuous. It's not fun when it's your wife being promiscuous. Or if you really wanted to hit home, it's not fun when it's your little sister being promiscuous, right? You want better for them. How about drunkenness? That's one of those that we look at and say, well, maybe that's kind of fun. Maybe I'm kind of tempted to get into that. But here's the deal. It's not. It's not fun the next day when you're hugging a toilet. It's not fun the next day when you realize that you said something really hurtful to somebody you love. It's not fun when you get in a wreck and your friend dies and you don't. And I know that's really heavy, but here's the thing. That happened to someone Brooke and I know. Someone who we were close to at one point in our lives. And our hearts broke for them when we heard about it. And my heart breaks for any of you who have to experience something like that. God's heart breaks for you. That's why he wants us to acknowledge a new way. That's why he wants for us better things. He wants for us to be able to embrace this new humanity, this new culture. He wants you to think about your convictions that you have. What wakes you up in the morning? What do you believe about the story of the world? And what are you committing your lives to? And the argument is, this new humanity, this new culture that Jesus came to establish, It is better. Because here's the deal. For centuries after century, for civilization after civilization, these old ways, they weren't old. They were normal. Normal ways of operating. And I bet every single one of you can look at either your life, or you can look at the lives of loved ones or the lives of people that you interact day in and day out, and you can say, you know what? That's normal. That's not a surprise to see people participating in that. And this is very important for us to recognize, and you know it to be true. Normal is broken. We need a new normal. We need a new culture. It starts with your convictions. Remember what I said. If you don't have convictions, you will just drift. If you don't have convictions about the way the world is, if the way you want to live, if you don't have convictions, you will drift along with the crazy culture. But you can put it another way. If you look at the next slide, if you don't have convictions, you will drift with what is normal. If you don't have convictions, you will drift with what is normal. So what do we do about it? How do we try to exist? How do we try to maintain convictions that are good, that are part of the new culture that Jesus came to create? Well, that's good that we ask, because Paul gets into that in the latter half of the book. And we need to spend some time talking about it so that you can see some things that are very, very practical for us. Paul gets into it in the rest of the book. And what I want to do for the rest of our time is I want to spend some time in 2 verses that he talks about. And those 2 verses can be summed up in this next statement that I want you to see. Your crowd and your calendar will determine how well you can hang on to your convictions. Your crowd and your calendar will determine how well you can hang on to your convictions. Let me show you something that Paul wrote. Let me show you something that Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. Do not be partners with them. Paul gives these people, as he's talking about this new culture that we're here to create, he says you need to think about who you're partnering with in life. This is something that we know to be true. That's why there is that old saying, if you want to know your future, just look at your friends. Right? I don't know if some of you use that. We use it with our kids all the time. Brooke and I know this to be true. In fact, when we get together with our kids at the end of the day and we have dinner together, there is always 2 questions that we ask them. The first question is, what's the best thing that happened to you today? What's the worst thing that happened to you today? And they go through what those are. The second question is this: who did you play with on the playground? And we're interested in who they played with and what they did, but the reality is, Santa's not the only one making a list and checking it twice. Brooke and John are making a list too. We're trying to find out who is naughty and nice. And let me just kind of give you a little bit of a warning, or a little bit of a heads up. You might be thinking, okay, what about my kid? Is my kid on John and Brooke's naughty or nice list? If you are at church, chances are your kid's on the nice list. Okay, I'm not making any promises, but the chances are, if you're at church, if you're hearing my voice right now, your kid is on the nice list. But we're concerned about that. We want to know who our kids are hanging out with, because it is true. Your crowd is very important when it comes to determining whether you can hang on to your convictions. So let me just mention to you 3 things about our crowd. And this has to do with every single one of us. The first thing that I want you to know is your crowd is where your convictions turn into action. It's real easy for us to sit back here and look at that thing up on the wall and say, yeah, you know what, I agree with the new ways, not the old ways. I think that's probably the best way to live. I think that's a good thing. But the rubber really meets the road is when you get a call from somebody in your crowd and they say, hey, guess what I heard about Sally? And it's so tempting. I'm sorry if anybody's named Sally. I'm just making that up right now. I don't really know any rumor about you. But here's the deal. When you get that call and the conversation starts out that way, and then you remember that gossip is part of the old ways, it's so hard to put that phone down or to change the direction of that conversation. Or man, when you have the opportunity to get that guy back who threw you under the bus in the last meeting at work, and you have the chance to really get him, and then you remember revenge is part of the old ways. It's not part of the new ways. It's so hard to pull away and not do that. That is where the rubber meets the road. That is where we find challenge. Your crowd is where your convictions, these big, grand ideas about what you believe about the story of the world, what you believe about God and Jesus and the culture that Jesus came to create, it meets the road in your crowd. That's the first thing I want you to know. The second thing that I want you to know is this. We all must interact with people who don't share our convictions. You don't get to choose everybody that is in your crowd. You don't get to choose your coworkers. You don't get to choose your siblings. You don't get to choose your parents. We don't get to choose that. So here's the perspective that I would encourage you to think about. There is opportunity there. These people, a lot of times we're tempted, especially those of us who have been in this faith a long time, we're tempted to see those people as obstacles. We see those as people who we got to get them into their place, and we got to tell them what's right and what's wrong. But actually, if you would just think of them as opportunity for them to see the new culture in action. Because I guarantee you, when they see it in action, when they see the new way, the new humanity that Jesus came to create, they will notice. And they will want to be part of it. What an amazing opportunity every single one of you have when you go to work. If you're a teacher, you have an opportunity to show kids the new humanity, kids who all they ever see in their home is the old ways. Not just the kids, but the coworkers as well. If you run a department, if you run a business, if you even work in a business, you have an opportunity to tell all of the other business cultures of the world, this is what a business culture looks like when it is defined by Jesus' new way, Jesus' new humanity. What an opportunity you have. The third thing that I want you to know about your crowd is this. Everyone needs a crowd who shares their convictions. There are some crowds we don't get to choose. We don't get to choose our coworkers. We don't get to choose our siblings. But we do get to choose some of the people in our life. And this is where we have to develop discipline in meeting with people who do share our convictions. Now here's the temptation for all of us. For all of us who are in adult worship, here's our temptation. We look at that, or we hear this lesson about crowds, and we're tempted to say, man, I wish I had heard that when I'm younger. We'll say, man, I wish my kid could hear that. But here's the deal. You can do things that betray your convictions. You can get crazy at any age. There is no expiration date on brokenness. It is always an option. Just because you've gotten out of your 20s, just because you've gotten out of your 30s or your 40s or your 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way through, it doesn't mean that you are immune to terrible decisions. And that's why it's so important for you to choose to have a crowd that you get together with regularly, a crowd that shares your convictions. Because as Paul writes here, you've got to be really careful about who you partner with in life. You will drift toward your friends. You will drift toward normal. You will drift toward a crazy culture. And one of the things you can do to build up a wall or to build up a strength in being in this culture is saying, you know what, I'm going to get with people who share my convictions. Next month, we're going to be talking about some new small groups that are going to be starting at the church in August. And I encourage you to take advantage of those things. I encourage you to take advantage. My dad leads one, I lead one, my brother's starting one. We've got several other people who are starting new ones, about 5 or 6 new groups that are popping up in August, and we're very excited about it. It's something that we believe in. It's something that we'll say sometimes is this idea, circles are better than pews. Okay? Circles are better than rows. I can sit here and talk to you all day, and you can nod your head and agree with me in this context, but when you sit in a circle, you have to really dive into it. And so I want to encourage you to do that. I want to encourage you to take advantage of that. The biggest pushback against it is this. The biggest pushback is this. You know what? I just don't have time. I just don't have time to do that. Well, Paul kind of addressed that. Now, that's the next scripture that I want us to look at. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. He writes this. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Now, you see that word evil, and that sounds extreme, right? Like, I've said that the culture is crazy. I've said that normal is broken. However, he says that the days are evil. But before we put Paul in this extreme box, before we say, yeah, no, lies are bad, but evil, come on. I want you to think about something. I want to put that image back up of the old ways and the new ways. And I want you to see this. I want you to think about this. When you look at the old ways, lies, anger, theft, gossip, revenge, promiscuity, drunkenness, are those not the seeds to the absolute worst in human behavior? Are they not? I mean, think about all those millions of people that died in World War I and II. World War II started with a lie that certain people don't deserve to live. It was a lie that people decided to believe. These things plant the seeds. Think about anger. A man doesn't deal with his anger. A dad, a husband doesn't deal with his anger. And he spends years terrorizing his family. And they have to then go the rest of their lives dealing with that. You could go up and down that list and you could see how those things are the seeds for the absolute worst in human behavior. And so, when you ask me, is evil too strong a category to say or to call what we've allowed to become normal in our lives, normal in our culture? No. Evil is not too strong a category. And I think you would agree when you think about it like that. And so we have to be very cautious, as Paul says. He says we need to be very careful with what we do in our days. And what I think would be great is if we actually just took Paul's advice on this and we had a little sort of three-filter mechanism that we put every decision that we have to go through to decide whether or not we should do it. Because Paul says three things. I want you to look at this. He says three things in this verse. He talks about being careful, being wise, and making the most. So here's the deal. Next time somebody calls you and says, hey, you want to go out on Friday night? I want you to do this. And here's the thing. You're going to be kind of weird if you do this because it's going to make your answer come very slowly. So I want you to say, okay, hang on. I need to process this just a little bit. Let me call you back tomorrow. And ask yourself, first of all, am I being careful with this decision? Careful means when somebody takes great care in doing something, what we would say is they have thought through every detail. They know what it's going to cost. They know what it's going to take. They know who it's going to affect. And it's only then that they do it. So if we are careful with our decisions, being careful answers the question, can I do it? Is this doable? So maybe it makes it through that part of the filter. Maybe it makes it through that. I can do it. Then the next question is this wise? And when we ask the question of wise, we're asking, is this valuable? Does this support the convictions that I have claimed about what I believe about the world and the kind of culture I want to create? Is this the wise thing for me to do? Is it valuable? Does it support my convictions? So here's the thing. Maybe we've decided that something is doable. Maybe we've decided that it's even valuable. Here is where we really take the extra step and make the most of our days. Is we ask that question, does this make the most of the opportunities that I have? Does this make the most? Is this the absolute best way to do that? Is this the best thing that I can choose that is valuable, that is wise? Because a lot of things are doable, and they're even doable and valuable and wise. But they might not be the thing that makes the most of your days. Guys, the last time I checked, we're not getting any more than 24 hours in a day cycle, right? Whether you believe that God established that or it happens some other way, apparently somebody thinks that's all we need. So if that's all we need, and we're struggling to figure it out, then maybe we need to start asking these questions about, am I being careful, wise, and making the most of every opportunity? And it's hard, but that's why we call them convictions. I didn't say these are suggestions. We've got to ask the question, what do I believe about the world? What do I believe about the culture that Jesus came to establish? And am I willing to orient my crowd and my calendar to support those convictions? Paul used some really interesting imagery throughout this book to contrast the idea of the old and the new. And he was talking about people who go through life kind of living by the old ways. They've not really thought about what their life is about. They've not given to this thing of joining God's story and being part of a new culture. And he says it's like being in darkness. It's like sleepwalking. My daughter and my wife both sleepwalk. And it's the most interesting thing. You will go up to them and they'll be walking through the house and they are absolutely convinced that they know reality, but they don't. They're asleep. It can be scary. It can be very funny. I have lots of stories. But here's the thing. It's not funny when that's our lives. It's not funny when we're sleepwalking through our lives. It's not funny when we're going through our lives in darkness, not considering what our convictions are, not considering who our crowd is and what our calendar is. So Paul writes this. He says, people who do that, it's like they're in darkness. And I love what he says. He says, wake up. Wake up, O sleeper. That's what I ask you to do today. Because maybe as I've been talking about this, you've thought to yourself, you know what? I don't know that I necessarily am living by these convictions. I don't know that I've oriented my crowd and my calendar around the convictions that I say I hold to be true. Today is the opportunity for you to say, I wake up. I go a different way. I'm going to believe that story about God. I'm going to start participating in that new culture that Jesus came to create because it is better. I promise you, there is so much pain associated with the old way you don't want it. So as we hear this song, as we sing this song, I want you to pray. God, help me wake up. If you want to come down here and talk to me about it, we can do that. If you just want to simply come down here and pray that God helps you wake up, I encourage you to do that. Let's stand together. Let's listen. Let's sing.